Alexei had always been a person who valued peace and predictability. He enjoyed his job in a small bookstore, and living in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city seemed to him the best reward for his persistence and hard work. One event changed his world forever, forcing him to plunge into an abyss of horror from which, as it turned out, there was no way out. So it all started with one ordinary day. Alexei, as usual, came to work, put books on the shelves, helped customers. But by the end of the day, a man entered the store whose face Alexei could not describe even a few minutes after he left. It was as if erased, faceless, unremarkable, but this man's eyes, dark like abysses, pierced Alexei through and through. He bought one book, The History of Abandoned Houses. Alexei noted the title to himself as strange and even a little creepy, but did not pay much attention. After that day, he no longer saw that man. However, something in his life began to change. The next night, Alexei woke up with the strange feeling that someone was watching him. He opened his eyes and looked around the room. Darkness covered everything around him, and only a weak light from a street lamp penetrated through the curtains. But nothing seemed strange, at least at first glance. However, the feeling that someone was watching him did not leave. Alexei got out of bed, slowly walked to the window and looked out. There was no one on the street. He even allowed himself to quietly sigh with relief when he suddenly noticed something strange in the reflection of the glass. Behind him, in the corner of the room, stood a figure. He turned around sharply, but the room was empty. His heart began to beat wildly. Alexei decided that it was just a play of shadows and tried to return to bed, but he could not fall asleep. The next night passed more calmly, but on the third, everything repeated itself. Alexei again woke up with a feeling of someone else's presence. This time it was so clear that he felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Looking around the room, he noticed a strange movement in the mirror hanging on the wall. He didn't remember having a mirror in his room. His heart began to pound like a hammer again. The mirror only showed part of the room, but this time Alexei clearly saw a figure standing in the shadow of the corner in the reflection. It didn't move, but its presence was ominous. Alexei tried to calm himself by thinking that it was his imagination playing a cruel joke on him. But as the nights turned into unbearable hours of anxiety, he began to realize that something in his house had changed. So the figure appeared every night. It stood in the corner, always out of direct view, but clearly visible in the mirror or in the reflection of the windows. Alexei stopped sleeping, afraid that if he closed his eyes, this creature would come closer. He didn't know who it was, but he felt its thirst, its anticipation. Finally, Alexei decided to see a psychotherapist. The doctor listened to him carefully, prescribed a sedative, and advised him to rest more. But neither the medicine nor the advice helped. The figure became more and more distinct, and his presence became unbearable. One night, Alexei, driven to the brink, decided to check the book that the strange man had bought in the store. He remembered that the title had struck him. He took it off the shelf and began to leaf through the pages, but at first he didn't find anything special in it. The book seemed ordinary, containing descriptions of old houses, their history, and legends. But towards the end of the book, Alexei came across a chapter that talked about houses that had become a home for entities from another dimension. It said that those who decided to invade their space or attract their attention would be forever connected to these creatures. At that moment, Alexei felt a cold wind rush through the room, even though the windows were closed. He looked up and saw a figure in the mirror, no longer standing in the corner, but right behind him. He realized with horror that this entity had been waiting for him to become aware of its presence all this time. As soon as his mind acknowledged its reality, it became stronger. It no longer just stood there. It began to move. Alexei felt the creature approaching, even though his eyes did not see the movement directly. It was getting closer with each passing moment, and finally he felt its cold breath on the back of his head. He screamed, trying to run away, but his feet seemed to have grown to the floor. The creature was whispering something in his ear, its voice low and hoarse, as if from another world. Alexei did not understand the words, but each whisper echoed in his head with horror and hopelessness. He knew that this was the end. But the creature did not kill him immediately. It played with him, enjoying his fear. A few days passed, and Alexei couldn't stand it anymore. He barely slept, ate, or communicated with anyone. When he tried to burn the book, but the fire went out as soon as it touched his innocent. He tried to get rid of the mirror, but it always returned to its place, as if glued to the wall. In desperation, Alexei began to find exits in old records and ancient rituals. He read about how to get rid of entities, about spells and protective symbols. But every step he took only strengthened their influence. The creature was getting closer. Its touch was now felt on his skin, and its whispers were becoming louder. One of the last nights, Alexei, driven to madness, decided that the only way to stop this nightmare was to commit suicide. He wrote a note in which he explained that he could no longer live in this horror and prepared a noose. But just as he was about to put it on, the creature that had been watching him all these days finally revealed itself in all its terrible essence. It was something huge, covered in shadows, and its face was like a veil of darkness. It approached Alexei and whispered the last word in his ear. Alexei fell to the floor unconscious. When they found him the next day, his body was cold but alive. However, his mind was broken. He never spoke again or tried to explain what had happened to him. He was taken to a mental hospital, where he spent the rest of his days quietly whispering something unintelligible, looking into the mirror that stood in his room.